Hello, I'm John David Ebert, and welcome back to our discussion of understanding contemporary art. What I'd like to do now is to look back at Great Britain. We're in the middle of a discussion of land art here in America, which was something that was essentially, for the most part, pioneered by Americans. But there was also some land art going on in Britain at just about the same time. And so what I want to do is look at the works of Richard Long and Andy Goldsworthy. And I specifically want to go through the works of Andy Goldsworthy in this video and in the next one. There's a lot to look at. One of the things about Andy Goldsworthy then, again, is the contrast as I set it up originally with James Turrell. So if we think of James Turrell versus Andy Goldsworthy as a kind of thesis antithesis, framed as I suggested at the beginning of the discussion, looking at Raphael's School of Athens with Plato juxtaposed to Aristotle. With Plato we have a metaphysics of transcendentalism, a quest for eternal pure forms. And Plato's whole ontology comes out of his fusion of Parmenides on the one hand, which is a kind of thesis, the quest for the Parmenidean one, the ultimate stasis that Parmenides is in quest of, and his fusion with Heraclitus. Heraclitus said that we could never step into the same river twice, so he has a metaphysics of flowing rivers and of metamorphosing processes. The logos is like a burning fire that is constantly moving through nature. And so what Plato does is he essentially takes Parmenides, the Parmenidean one becomes the Platonic forms, which are ultimate, transcendental, eternal forms, and the realm of Heraclitus with his flowing river becomes the realm of the senses that Plato devalues, of course, the realm of becoming and the senses. And so we get Plato as the synthesis of those two, with Aristotle then acting as another antithesis against Plato, with Aristotle's emphasis that the forms are not just up there, they're not just mathematical shapes, they're something immanent in nature as entelechies. And entelechy is like a little soul that something has that is trying to actualize possibilities and to fulfill them. The acorn has within it the tree that it is trying to get to as its goal, its telos, and the entelechy within that acorn is essentially a kind of Platonic form that's trapped in nature trying to get out. It's actualizing all of its possibilities. And so in a certain sense, I think if we contrast Andy Goldsworthy with James Turrell, we can see that with James Turrell, we have a quest for, with Road and Crater, permanence, with a realm of eternal, monumental, grand structures and forms that will last. With Andy Goldsworthy, on the other hand, what we have is a metaphysics of ephemerality and process. Most of his sculptures are built to last only for, some of them for a few hours, some even for a few minutes, but some for a few hours, some for a few days, some for longer periods, but most of them are immediately done away with, blown away by the wind. They're very ephemeral, and there's a trust in nature. Goldsworthy, I think, demonstrates a really good understanding of the morphogenetic processes of nature. And so what I want to do is get right to the work and look at them. First, though, I do want to look at another British land artist named Richard Long. This is Richard Long's line made by walking in 1967, which he did in 1967, exactly contemporary with what was going on over in America with Walter de Maria and so forth. And in this case, he simply made a line by traversing this path back and forth, and then photographed it. So we have this demarcation of the birth of British land art with the etching out of a line. This is another Richard Long work. This one is Stone Line from 1977. We have stones that are gathered up. And note that with Richard Long, in contrast to Andy Goldsworthy, we have nature is packed up as matter that is subordinated to the Platonic geometrical forms that he imposes on the matter. With Richard Long, there's always a geometry that is imposed upon nature, as in this one here, which is the 1987 work, Small White Pebble Circle. Or in this later work, a 2000 work, a much more recent one, Slate Cross. All geometries and all the properties of nature are made to conform with the geometries that he imposes upon them. Andy Goldsworthy, meanwhile, who's a Scottish artist. Richard Long was a British artist. Goldsworthy, however, comes from Scotland, where he has resided ever since. And he is much more comfortable in the rural areas of the farms and small villages that he grew up in. So his art is a post-urban art. It's an art that is antipathetic to the city. And along with that, then, it's an art that doesn't really need geometries. The geometries that Andy Goldsworthy finds are immanent in nature, like fractals. They're not something that he imposes on nature. But he begins with geometry here. This is a line that he made, removed turf from a line in 1976 that he made that's obviously a direct allusion to Richard Long's line. So he starts off with some geometries here. This is a stone circle that he made in the sand in 1976. So he's still got, he's still bound with what he calls the cliche of geometry. But it doesn't take him long to break out of the cliche of geometry and to start finding forms and patterns that are immanent in nature, that he starts breaking open things to release their morphogenetic potential, if we want to put it that way. This one here, for instance, which dates from 1978, Broken Stones Scratched White. Here he has taken these stones and he has broken them and then scratched them. And notice that here now he's also breaking free of Platonic geometries. These are not Platonic geometries at all. Indeed, one could scarcely even call them geometries, but nonetheless, there are formal patterns here. He is discovering formal patterns in nature. This one is a 1978 work, and these are all photographs of works that he simply makes and then photographs, and the work lets nature take care of the work. So all of these works are ephemeral. This is partly striped sycamore twigs that he has taken, and he has not painted them. He doesn't use paints. This is just simply the interaction of the sycamore twig with the soil or the natural environment that has produced it, and he simply arranged them in an aesthetically pleasing pattern. And this work here, I think, is a breakthrough for him. It's a 1970 work called Balanced Rocks, and it's a breakthrough in the sense that it exhibits the signature Goldsworthian suspension of probability. And that's the thing about Goldsworthy's work. When we look at it, these are simply balanced rocks, and it looks impossible that he has figured out how to do this, to create this form of ephemerality that temporarily reverses entropy and seems to suspend the laws of nature and physics. Suspension of probability is the key thing that Goldsworthy has discovered as a British or a Scottish land artist. Here's another early Goldsworthy work that is a signature trait of his, Elm Leaves, 1978. He paints with leaves. He never uses paint. He always finds his pigments in natural elements and substances themselves. And if he wants to paint, he simply takes colors from leaves and arranges them in an aesthetic configuration that is wondrous and reveals a sense of aesthetic arrest. Here's another work from 1979, Mud-Edged Trench, which is very Goldsworthian. He simply lined this little trench with mud to illuminate it. He gives everything a kind of glow so that these little structures that he discovers as immanental forms within nature, they radiate their own luminous energy and light, and they glow. Very marvelous work here. This is a 1982 work that he has done called Feathers Plucked from a Dead Heron. And he simply arranged these feathers over 3 days in a specific configuration. It took him 3 days to do it. And of course, the wind is simply going to blow it away. And the only record that he has left are this collection of photographs that he takes to be the only reminder that is left of these ephemeral works. This is a slate arch, one of his earliest slate arches from 1982. And again, we see the fantastic suspension of probability here with these slate arches. Later, he will do these with snow and ice, which are even more improbable. And he just simply erects them this way and spends time and patience sitting, figuring out exactly how the stones will fit together. There's an almost Japanese Zen-like influence on Goldsworthy. He has a sort of Japanese Zen-like sense for the way that forms fit together. That's a rare talent to have that sense. I think Goethe would have liked Goldsworthy. This is another early work of his. This is 1984, Frozen Patch of Snow. Each section carved with a stick. Another improbable form. It's got a serpentine angle to it, and because it's made out of snow, we know that it's going to melt very soon. So these are very ephemeral, transitory forms. This is the sort of river of time that he's exploring that is immanent in nature. These are entelechies, processes that are moving through nature that he's simply breaking nature open to reveal. It's as though these things are emerging right out of the earth. Unlike Turrell, who imposes, and this is not a slight against Turrell or anything like that, but Turrell imposes Platonic forms onto the sky and onto light. He's carving with light and imposing Platonic forms and looking in the heavens for these Platonic forms. But for Goldsworthy, they just come right out of the ground. This is a classic Goldsworthy work, and I think by the mid-'80s he had found his forte here. This is carefully broken pebbles scratched with other stones. He has sat and carefully broken each one of these stones in half, and then used the other stones to make little scratches on each one of them, and arranged them in a kind of Fibonacci spiral here. In this sense, it is definitely a geometry that he's imposing here. But it's a geometry that looks like it belongs there. And that's one of the things about Goldsworthy's works, is that everything that he creates looks as though it belongs in nature. It doesn't look so much like a human intervention. It looks like something that nature might have come up with on its own, which is the amazing thing with his work. And this is the last work that I want to show for Goldsworthy's early works. This is 1986, Cracked Earth Moved, where he's gone in and he's treated cracked earth aesthetically simply by removing certain flakes from it to give it an aesthetic pattern to it. And so that gives us a sense of the early works of Andy Goldsworthy, and I think what we'll do next is look at some of the later works.